couple of things come to mind. One of which is, I think the secondaries panel was an important one. Obviously, AI. Everyone's more sophisticated than I am, and I need to catch up. People have AIs that they're training for multiple roles in their organizations and personal lives, and I think that's something. And then we talked about all the time we're about to have on our hands with the productivity increases. We talked about, but all the people that are about to become unemployed. We've been talking about it, but it's going to happen. Not what should our kids be studying? We don't need any more engineers, per se. At least not as much. Who can manage the softer skills and learning to learn? That was Ed Oates, the co-founder of Oracle. I think the softer leadership roles. But
we got to figure it out now.
Stephen.
They're leaving Mark.
Anything, Stephen, on your side, some reflections on yesterday?
The secondaries, getting the liquidity back and getting stuff moving again seems to be, we've gummed up the works a little bit, and getting that unglued would be important. I think was one of the takeaways.
I think it seems like a lot of people. If you can get 2 to 5 year duration and make 2 to 5 times your money, or you can tweak those variations rather than go into a 15-year fund. So that was their case partly, and the fact that the capital markets are just longer to access. So the importance of liquidity and the importance for the LP community was we heard a lot about.
They also were clear that all VCs lie. I think that was one of the other takeaways, which the panel fully agreed with.
Yes, there's something to that.
Now you tell me.
That's part. It should be added to your due diligence checklist, Michael.
No, we lost audio.
Mark, I think Ken Goldman's views that on the labor issues coming out of AI, that we'll get through it. That's not a lack of acknowledgement of the short-term pain for those that are really caught in this 20-year-old age group now that have been thrown from the time they were born with the wars, the pandemic, the great financial crisis, and now AI going after the entry-level jobs. And that was, that's the concern that a lot of people have voiced about the employment market. And then Ken said, his view is we've gone through this before in other transitions like this, and this too shall pass, was kind of his take. I thought that was a different perspective than most people's short-term concerns right now.
On this subject, yesterday there was an article about how it pays more now to be a plumber, or these skill sets, like it may be more useful to learn certain skill sets than just these data entry level jobs. And another financial thing is actually a lot of investment banks, they're going to Mid-America, etc., or gathering up through search funds these cash making businesses like auto repairs, plumbing, roof tiling, estheticians, whatever it is, and creating efficiencies, and it has become a new model of sorts.
Yeah, that roll-up model has mixed success by industry, so it is it is something that trades were a part of the discussion. I think the other comment from Ken Goldman, which I thought was interesting, Mark, was that if you're in the top third of your profession, that AI will support you and help you stay in the top third. If you're not there, you're going to have challenges. And I thought that was an interesting take too, that you still need the judgment that goes with the leadership vision that the top people in all industries have. And I thought that was an interesting take as well. Mark, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
I don't.
Okay.
How about now?
Yes.
Yes.
If we're talking about where to invest as AI rolls in, that there's a theme that I've been pursuing recently, and I think that there is a hangover of people used to paying a certain price for certain service, which can now be delivered dramatically less expensively. So I think the elasticity in that price is going to stay there for a while. I'll give you one example, is audits. So I'm on the board of a publicly traded organization. We pay about $50,000 a year for an audit, but I think the cost of that audit to our auditors is dropping dramatically as they use more AI. But they're not going to drop the price. They're still going to charge the $50,000 because we're used to paying it. And that's what we expect to pay. Over time, we're going to wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And competition is going to set in. But in the interim, I think some of the accounting companies, some of the consulting companies are really going to be able to take advantage of this from a profitability point of view. And so from a free cash point of view, it's going to be a place that I'm putting some of my money in the short term anyway.
Mark, didn't Oates say something similar on the big tech that they're going to be able to lower their costs because they won't need as many coders, but they'll still need coders, but they'll have fewer of them, and that will drop to the bottom line as well.
And,
I think one of the
and their 5,000 or their 1,000 person help desk is going to be a 100 person help desk too. So
Well, to that point, we've been talking about India and India rising, but we don't need chief or Filipino or call center resources as much.
Right.
And it's an interesting crosswind.
It also goes to immigration policy.
To your point on audit, it's immigration policy, but your point on audit, Bruce, we need authenticity and we need verity. We need checks and balances. It needs to be, and people pay up for that. So it's the cost of implementing the audit is one thing, but I used to be 361 firm. The one firm comes from Arthur Andersen, so I was in an auditing firm as a partner. A lot of it is your brand standing behind that audit. Of course, it brought down a firm named Arthur Andersen, but I think that a lot of interesting crosswinds. A lot of provocative discussions, and all this will be on video and shared. We're in the process of cutting it up and sending it out. It makes for really, really interesting searching and transcripts, which we're now also providing. So anyone else with just some reflections?
Mark, the last one for me was Daikai's discussion on AI and the concern of the audience about how we can take back some control, which was basically Day's presentation, right? Raising AI is his book, and I thought it was a really thoughtful discussion around that in the future of AI in terms of the concerns about AI taking over. It's an interesting discussion.
Yes. So we're just reflecting on our San Francisco, Berkeley, Menlo Park. Of course, we're at San Francisco's airport, heading to Seattle, going to Bellevue. Today we'll have the 4 p.m. and this is where I think Eric is on. We'll have the 4 p.m. at Valve. It's a company that I was not aware of, but revenues of 8 to 9 billion, touches gaming in different levels. really interesting technology that they're implementing. And then we move on to have some interesting founders and angel community of the Seattle area. Dave McClure's coming, and we were just like, get his take on this. Dave McClure, we were just, I was just talking about you. We were just reflecting on yesterday. I was curious.
It was good things.
It was, well, I don't think there was some provocative discussion. Zarin on the call was talking about a really high octane investment. You had said, so Dave McClure is the founder of 500 Startups. He was PayPal, part of that mafia in a good way. And now he's doing something, it seems like an oxymoronic. It's called practical VC, moving into the secondary space. And we're just reflecting on what we learned yesterday, and how to think about Silicon Valley, how to play venture. And I think one of the takeaways for me is what you were saying. You have the occasional 1000x. You hope 10% does. You hope 10% does 10x, and 50% will fail roughly. And but maybe there's a better model, because the markets, the traditional capital markets for IPOs and liquidity, just aren't there. And so you've pivoted 5 years ago into secondaries. Zarin, am I capturing your question? You want to say something before Dave?
Yeah, just very quickly. Also, IRR discussions regarding the traditional portfolio management, IRR discussions, and bringing the timing of the value, how the time changes, is also important in the venture return model. People talk about X's, but returning what X in what amount of time is very important. And there's a very interesting discussion with Dan Gray on this. I'll put on the chat on YouTube.
But maybe, Dave, you can introduce yourself to the wider community if you don't mind.
Sure. Thanks for the brief intro. And I guess I've been here in the Valley for probably a little over 30 years. Started out as a software developer, and then entrepreneur, and then later an investor. Spent a lot of years doing early stage investments at 500 Startups. We were doing hundreds of investments per year at very early stages. And that went fairly well. But again, as you noted, investments take a long time. Venture is probably more of a 15-year asset class than a 10-year asset class. So at least a few years back, we decided, hey, maybe we could solve some of those challenges in liquidity horizon by sort of just cutting the VC fund in half and buying pieces of funds when they're in the back half. So funds when they're 7 to 10 years old, or companies when they're already doing 50 to 100 million in revenue. And turns out secondaries are on everybody's minds lately, I guess.
Or liquidity is, for sure.
Correct. Yeah.
So,
although I would say that's a world of sort of two different stories, as we were discussing yesterday. There's kind of the very popular stories, which are like SpaceX, OpenAI, Anthropic, those things, which probably, really it's a seller's market. Those assets are at a premium. But there's a lot of other companies where it's much more of a buyer's market. There really is some great value there. And for folks who are looking to sell those positions early and get liquidity, it can be a great opportunity to jump in, hopefully at a substantial discount. That's particularly true if you're buying fund secondary positions as opposed to company secondary positions.
right, and not those three names.
Mark,
So,
I thought Dave's panel where they talked about the SpaceX SPVs and the risks that are in there is actually worth a mention.
well, the SPVs upon SPVs upon SPVs, and what when there is liquidity, do you really own what you think you own? Right?
Hi.
Yeah, I think that's becoming a lot more common.
Yeah.
So I would say, a single layer SPV where that SPV is on the cap table is probably fine. And at least where you understand, what the economics are of that SPV. But as mentioned, sometimes there can be multiple layers, and not always understanding what the positions are there can be challenging.
Yeah.
I think there were some stats from Forge recently, which is a retail marketplace for direct secondary. They indicated that probably more than half of their transactions were now happening within a single asset SPV structure. And nothing
Look,
against SpaceX or those other companies, which can be great bets. Those are more premium stories and later stage bets, but I think the benefits of secondary are really finding some less, visible assets that are doing well, hopefully getting in a 20, 30, 40% discounts to those assets, and then having a much shorter horizon to future liquidity.
so let's we're about to transition to, sorry, Mike, I want to make sure we hit on time because we have we're going to talk about from Stephen's perspective how he sees some of the things we need to be thinking about, and then with what Israel and Iran, that their exchange, and then what Israel's doing in the skies now, and all the other permutations of and ramifications. We want to hit that with Hamlet Yusuf and have an engaging discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Stephen, for our 271st Tuesday briefing.
Thanks, Mark. Oops. That one. 270, and I still have trouble getting logged in.
I gave you only 2 seconds warning on that one.
All right, this is looking better.
You're getting better at it, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, let me start with a correction of a mistake I made last week, which Tim helped me with. I was discussing a report and I referenced it as a report from Larry Summers, and it was actually from Glenn Hubbard, and I do know the difference between the two. I realize their views are somewhat different, as you all are aware, but when I told Jack Wyant about it, he said, that's too bad because I like the numbers. But I think the numbers remain the same, but that was my mistake. Tim, thank you for reminding me, and let's see what I step in today, as we're going to be discussing some of the forces that are really challenging government leaders and policymakers as well as investors. So let's jump right in. So tomorrow is Fed decision day. There's a 99.9% chance, according to the CME FedWatch, of no cut this week, a 14% chance of easing in July, and a 68% chance of easing in September. This is a survey from Bloomberg that says, when do economists think the Fed will have enough clarity to determine the net impact of the Trump policy changes? And it's really September on, and I think that reflects what the Fed watch is. I do think that from our view, we could see 0 rate cuts, or you could see more, depends on which way the economy breaks. And I think that's the risk that's out there right now. But my leaning is more towards 0 than cuts this year, because the Fed's mandate is in conflict right now, and it's the employment numbers are strong still, but they're softening a little bit. The fears of inflation picking up are kind of growing, because we go into July with a view that Trump will be able to start his unilateral tariffs that he can do based on sector, industry, or country. And I think we will see him get a little more aggressive there. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But really, the market has changed from April to June, thinking that the Fed is going to be less on hold. I don't think the president calling him a numbskull last week is going to help. And I think it actually has the opposite effect, because I think it's going to turn the members of the voting members, make them more resolute supporting Powell, even if the president goes to a shadow Fed chair. And you're starting to see the guys who are lined up for that, with Walsh and David Malpass coming out saying that they think we should be cutting rates right now. So you can see the jockeying for that job as well. But I think Powell is going to be resolute. I think the Fed board will back him, and I think it'll be a challenge for them to be bullied right now into cutting rates. So they're also being challenged right now by the spike in oil prices, which tend to not last as much, and we've seen that already. Right now, as long as the Strait of Hormuz stays open, and as long as they keep avoiding the fields, and it remains a conflict between Israel and Iran, I think that will keep oil prices muted. But to give you a sense of what the impact of this is, according to the Fed model on the US economy, a sustained $10 increase in the price of oil would increase inflation by 0.4% and lower GDP by 0.4%. So fortunately, they haven't brought the oil assets in play right now. And I suspect that China and others are very focused on that. Russia has also had some easing because they're now, with prices where they are, they're much closer to their budgeted target. But the Fed is concerned about the last thing they need is higher oil prices right now. The only country that would really prefer them to be up much more would be Russia. And I don't think they're all that ready to see the Middle East blow up right now. So I think this is something to keep an eye on. I think the issue is will it expand? And I think that's one for Hamlet to answer. But I do think when you add to the challenge for the Fed, you have immigration, which could increase wage inflation and lower employment growth, which could further the stagflation shock that people are fearing. And when you have oil price increases, who gets hurt the most? Obviously, the low-end consumer in the US, as you can see by deciles what the impact is. And it does hurt them at a time that they really are struggling with higher prices in other areas. So I want to switch gears to the trade negotiations. And while President Trump considers himself a master negotiator, I'm not sure Sun Tzu would agree with his battle tactics when you started a trade war with China. And instead of having a Bitcoin reserve, talking about building a Bitcoin reserve, you should have had a rare earth reserve so that you wouldn't have to go back to the table when you got cut off on those. I believe that the US and China are trying to find a steady state because I think they both need one, and make their battle for global supremacy last a little bit longer while they focus on the economic impact. But I think you're seeing that we are a highly interconnected and interdependent global economy. And I think that is one thing that's creating some challenges for all policymakers right now, when you're trying to unwind that at a time that you can't just put the genie back in the bottle once you start changing global systems like this. I think one of the things that is going on that's really important for everyone to keep an eye on is China's manufacturing overcapacity, I think, is becoming their leading global export, which is deflation. And this is a fascinating chart from 23 of China's manufacturing labor force compared to the combined manufacturing labor force of NATO nations, 162 million versus 60, so 2.6 times higher labor force in that area. And that is a challenge, particularly for, I think, countries like Germany. It's been a challenge for the US for some time. I think reversing this is going to be quite difficult. And I think this is really what's driving a lot of the dialogue right now for policymakers. And China's imports have been changing pretty dramatically since 2003, as you can see. And who's getting hurt most by this? Two countries that can least afford it, two countries that are struggling to get any kind of growth going, Japan and Germany, and then the US and then India. So this is where the battle lines are being drawn, I think. And I think this change is going to be really important to get the right balancing going on. I also want to correct something I said last week, where I was pretty negative in the last couple of weeks, pretty negative on China's consumption. And what I missed was that their industrial sector is growing at such a high rate that the growth of their retail sector, which is about 8%, and maybe drops down to 5%, is still quite strong, but I don't think it's strong enough. And I don't think it's even enough to change the dialogue there. But it is something that I wanted to be more balanced about how I portray that. So the producer price index is the Fed's PCE indicator, is their favorite indicator, but the prices are trending in a way that is okay for the Fed, but I think they're worried about where we go from here. And Zarin, as you started, there's so much uncertainty and volatility right now that I don't think they're going to rush to push that too far. So just closing thoughts, money to be made all over the world. Don't chase the returns right now. And across any of the areas, I think the markets will come back to you. You know, the short rates were at zero for most of 09 to about 19. They moved up and then they came back down again. And now they're normalizing. And the short end being up 4% is a big deal. I think that is historically normal interest rate levels. And I think it's the dynamics of the global economy and the geopolitics that make the world not normal. And I think from an investing perspective, I think you should be using as your benchmark rates, not going back down much lower, and thinking about your return expectations and your time horizons in both the public and private markets at these rate levels, if not slightly higher. I don't see a lot of inflationary pressures in the short term if they get it right. I don't see a lot of downside pressure, but the risks are both ways right now, and I think that you have to be careful with that. I think regardless where you are, the money is going to flow to the areas of required spending right now, because I think governments and consumers have limited fiscal space, and that's going to put a lot on the private sector and on the high-end consumers around the world to keep the economy going. I think the government spend will be directed to national security, digitalization. The powering up of the global economy is still going to attract massive flows, although that has some problems with it, as we know. We've seen a lot of money made and lost there. And then the reindustrialization that's going on all around the world, I think, is going to be very important. And remember, we have massive rebuilds whenever the conflicts do end. I think the other thing is central bank policies have been diverging. I think you're going to see some challenges coming from them. I think the Bank of Japan has a big one right now. They have actually eased their tapering and have lower change plans to ease tapering because they were having problems on the long end of their bond market. I think that'll stabilize things a little bit for them. But through all the problems, the stock market continues to flirt with new highs. And it is fascinating being a New Yorker and coming out as we do each year, Mark, to the Valley. And it's like going to a different world where all the problems of the rest of the world don't exist and everyone's not really focusing on what's here today, but they're so focused on the future and completely excited about the innovation and what's coming. And I think if we get it right, the productivity improvements are the hope for investors, because a change in productivity, which has been low for the world and for the US for some time, the US is running about 1.6, 1.8% productivity. If you get that back up to 2.5%, 3%, you will have a significant impact on the economy, and the whole dynamics change considerably. So, Mark, I'm going to stop there. We can either open it up for discussion, or if Hamlet's on, convert over there.
Before we go to Iran, I think it's useful just to reflect again on what you just put out there. Questions for or comments on what Stephen just talked about?
Yeah, I have a question.
Please.
I was just at a private equity conference and they were talking about onshoring and reshoring.
Yep.
Is there a specific number that all of this onshoring for American manufacturing, how much is this going to increase our productivity as a nation? Do we have any numbers to that over the next, 5, 7, 10-year period?
No, and I think that's part of the debate that the government, the administration's having with the CBO on their projections. They're trying to create a view that the projections are being understated, and in the growth number, which I think the CBO is using like 1.9 or 1.8% GDP growth. And if you get the productivity right, it could go to 3% or higher. So I think that's really the wild card there. I think the onshoring and reshoring is actually was really hot and heavy, and that about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, it peaked. It started slowing down, and now it's starting to pick up again on the potential trade deals. But I don't think there's any real numbers on that now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mark, I don't know who's up next.
Anthony and then Adam.
Yeah.
Hi,
Questions?
Stephen.
Hey, Anthony.
Hi. Could, excuse me, historically, is it fair to say that you've been more US centric in terms of public investments? Not in the past, but just in general, that the firm is and has been US centric.
Yes.
And then I apologize, there's a lot of background noise here. So my question is, thank you for confirming that. My question is relative to what you said today, where I heard more than normal geographies that are outside the US being mentioned, and you were commenting on that dynamics in a way that you, from my recollection, seldom do. Are you considering, and how are you considering investments that are outside the US, whether these firms or companies are geographically registered, located, and or that their revenue is generated outside the US? How do you, if at all, look at allocating firm capital, meaning in the public space, to those firms and or geographies? And then if that's the case, have you thought about if and how you'll manage or not manage the currency exposures? Because a lot of the tailwind, in my opinion, this year has been to the weakening dollar, which has given external US a tailwind.
Sure.
So the answer to that is we are primarily US investors for the reasons that we think that the US companies get you enough global exposure that you don't have to go there, and we like the rule of law, or we had a stronger feeling for the rule of law previously. We like the accounting standards, things like that. And we're a small firm, so we have feet on the ground here and not everywhere. I also think that I just looked at this morning, the global stock market's about 123 billion, give or take, trillion, give or take. The US is 60 of that. The number two markets are, I think, 19 on a relative basis. So the US is, about 50%, 48% of that exposure. So I don't feel the need to go that far. An answer to where I would go, I think India, the Gulf, are two areas I would go. I think, and then I think thematically I would look at sectors, and I think the required spending that we've talked about, national security, as you've talked about in Europe, but I think there are limits, and I'd be careful about chasing, given the big moves, because I think we're going to have continued volatility that allow you to ride the roller coaster and take things when the market runs on you and buy things on the dips. And I think that's how we're playing it. I would think you're going to see a lot of volatility over the next couple of months, particularly as the president goes for the next round of trade discussions. Thanks,
Thanks.
Adam.
Adam.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank
Morning.
you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
The slide that you had on China importing less from specific countries, is that substitution for domestic made products? And in particular, Germany, where is that reduction coming from?
Well, I would go back to the chart where the imports were down, and it is trying to shift.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, trying to shift it to domestic manufacturing.
Okay.
And BYD's eating the world on low cost cars right now, and I think that's including in China. And that's the one thing about China is they eat the young there. I mean, it's if you're backed by the government, great, everyone can be in business, and whoever wins wins. I think that's one thing that people don't fully appreciate about that market, how much competition is there. And but I think that's the answer, Adam. I think they're targeting areas that they can do really well in, and they're going against industries that other countries are going to have a hard time competing. And I think this is one of the potential flaws of the trade issues is I think countries should manufacture and produce what they do well, and get the lower cost opportunities where they can, as long as national security is covered. I think you have to find the middle ground there. You're welcome.
Any
What
other
did Hamlet?
questions before we move over to what's happening in Iran and with Israel?
Mark, I would just add one thing. I think there's something really pretty interesting about, and Hamlet can touch on this, but the difference between the what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and what's going on in Israel and Iran on airspace is fascinating. When you see the chart of the planes that were over Iran versus the defensive, the Air Force of Iran, it's really frightening. And the fact that for years, Ukraine has been able to hold their airspace is really incredible against Russia. So I think that's either a sign of something really bad for Russia or really good for Ukraine, or both. But fascinating.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, it's different kind of dynamic today.
Yep.
Wojciech, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, is the situation, because you mentioned that oil prices increase inflation in the US, but is it overall impact? Because some few years ago there was a message that US became self-sufficient in oil production. Is it still the case? Is currently US the oil exporter? And what is the impact on the overall economy of the rising oil prices? So is basically positive or negative for the US in the long run, high oil prices?
Negative in the long run. And that those numbers I gave you is if you had it's 0.4% increase in inflation, 0.4% lower growth if you have it over a sustained period, not for the short-term blips. I think it costs the economy roughly about $17 billion a year for the $10 increase in oil prices against the consumer spending. So, and we are self-sufficient, but the shift in the dynamic of ESG a couple of years ago made the oil companies in the U.S. focus on return to shareholders rather than drilling to just drill. They've had a discipline that they never had before, put on them by Wall Street and by actually the regulations towards banks and bank lending. So I think that the idea of the oil companies will just drill is flawed by the administration. I think we are self-sufficient though and can continue to drill as long as we want, if we wanted to. Bruce, you had a question?
Yeah, Mark, did you want to go to the Iran conflict at this point, or I don't want to change topics unless you're ready to.
Did Simon have a question first or a statement?
We're about to, Bruce. Any other questions before we go to Iran? If not, then Hamlet, you want to tell us what the hell's happening today?
Yeah, global peace is breaking out as we speak. Seems like we got to find time for me to come on these calls and share some cheerful insight versus what's been happening for the last 3 years. It seems like it, but look, there's obviously a lot to talk about it. I'll touch on some kind of macro observations and kind of I guess give you my 2 cents on where this goes from here. For whatever my 2 cents is worth, I think it was on this call summer of 22 when I said the world is getting ready to go into a three-stage tragedy geopolitically. Phase one, or Act One, was going to be Putin's Ukrainian aggression Putin's aggression in Ukraine and kicking off a much greater conflict with the West. Act Two was going to be Iranian belligerence on the geopolitical stage with a nuclear overtone as they want to assert their hegemony in the region. And then Act Three is going to be the rise of China wanting to basically drive these two narratives and become the only superpower in the world and replace Western standards with the Beijing standards. So a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, is kind of coming to fruition. I am not surprised we're here. I think the foundation of this was set post October 7th, going back to when Israel unilaterally targeted and killed a IRGC senior Quds Force commander in an Iranian embassy annex in Damascus about a year and a half ago. There were 7 people in that building. They were all either Quds Force, Hezbollah, or Hamas related. So They weren't attacking diplomats or attacking IRGC elements that were using an annex building. In retaliation to that, you saw the firing of rocketry and missiles into Israel from Iranian soil. In retaliation, you saw for the first time firing of rockets and sorties from Israeli soil into Iranian territory. That was a tit for tat that happened over the last 18 months. I think the Israeli attacks were very precise, although not much was made of them. I think both of the attacks that Israel launched very specifically hit the targets they were after. They significantly weakened Iran's air defenses that gave them a corridor to eventually fly sorties into Iran if needed, if we ever got to this point. And unfortunately, I think we got here. What I think brought everything to a head is a fear on two fronts. One, Iran becoming dangerously close to getting to weapons grade enrichment of uranium. Not to bore you guys with the science, I'll break it down to the very simplest terms, which me as a non-science guy understands. You take raw uranium, you throw it in a bucket, you spin it really fast. It separates, it purifies. That's what the enrichment process goes through to get a piece of raw uranium ore and get it ready for use in a nuclear power plant or for civilian uses. You generally need to enrich it to the high single digits, teens, 20% maximum. Once you've proven the ability to do that, it's basically a matter of time and resources and a cascade of centrifuges to be able to enrich to 90% plus enrichment. That's when you have the ability to have weapons grade uranium. For years, the Iranians have told the West that they're pursuing nuclear as a national right and something they needed for peaceful reasons and for energy use. I vehemently disagree with that. And I guess before I continue, just as background, I do run a venture fund that focuses in defense tech. So this is an area we know very well. But I also served in the federal government. Iran has been my focus for the entirety of my life, and I was actually born in Iran. Left there post Shah. So I've had a vehement disdain and distrust of this current regime and everything it stands for. So 100% bias in my comments here. So take it for what it's worth. So I think the concern is Iran, I think, has been steadily progressing their ability to enrich uranium. Speculation was this year that they've reached 60+% enrichment. So if your entire program is for peaceful purposes only, there's zero need, zero justification to go above 20%. So the fact that they're progressing to 60% plus gives you a very good idea of where they're going. Estimates have Iran, given the stockpile with 65% enriched uranium, if they wanted to take that to full enrichment, that would potentially give them enough nuclear matter to create upwards to a half dozen to 10 nuclear weapons. So it obviously got everyone concerned. To have a weaponized nuclear program, you need three things. You need to have a delivery mechanism. The Iranian ballistic program has advanced significantly in the last 10 years. One of the failures of JCPOA, and I don't want to go down that path, but one of the failures of JCPOA, which was the former nuclear deal under Obama, it did not regulate the Iranians' ability to develop a ballistic program, which I thought was a complete failure point. The other two elements you need is you need enriched uranium. So it looks like Iran was making some significant progress there. The last part is you need a device. You need a triggering mechanism to be able to, again, I'm going to be very crude here, but to be able to take that lump of weaponized uranium, put it in a device that can trigger once the delivery mechanism puts it on target. Speculation was that's an area that Iran was deficient. So the fear was they could always go get a triggering device for the North Koreans. There's been some chatter, completely unvetted or unverified, that Iran was getting close to a crude triggering device as well. So I think we got to the point where push came to shove, and the Israelis, with probably some buy-in from the West, because I don't think they would do this completely unilaterally, decided it was time to act and it was time to move forward. What they pulled off last weekend, I think, was, to put it very bluntly, very awe-inspiring in terms of the level of complexity of what they were able to do. It looks like this is something that's been well in the works for a while. They've embedded operatives inside the country. Speculation here is they were building basically black sites inside Iran near targets where it gave them the ability to assemble and manufacture and assemble attack drones deep inside Iran. The issue here for the regime is this isn't something that happens through just Israeli action alone. You can't pull off something this complex without significant on-the-ground support with Iranians who are basically sympathizers with Israel. This is also evident in the fact that last year the Israelis were able to assassinate Haniya, one of the former heads of Hamas, when he was staying at basically the Ayatollah's guest house in Tehran, a secure compound in northern Tehran. To be able to pull off that level of execution, pun intended, you need to have significant resources and ability to reach inside Iran. So Israel, I think, has obviously demonstrated that capability to do that. I think what you saw happen was a series of coordinated events that was not all that different than how Israel neutralized Nasrallah and Hezbollah in September. You had a blitzkrieg attack that was targeted towards leadership, command and control, and the ability for the Iranians to make decisions. You had, I think, upwards of 24 senior IRGC Quds Force commanders that were targeted for assassination. You had several senior scientists, and these aren't people who are being forced to work in the nuclear program. These are people who proudly were working to advance the Iranian nuclear capability, were targeted and specific. So what happened since Thursday is it seems like the Israelis have been able to significantly neutralize Iran's air defenses. So at this point, they probably have carte blanche ability to carry on attacks and sorties as they need throughout Iran. That's going to give them, I think, continued capability to continue with precision strikes against leadership targets in IRGC facilities and resources throughout Iran. There's reporting they're starting to hit some critical energy infrastructure as well. The issue here is going to come for the Iranians is the Israelis are still operating. There's a report today, I think I saw it, I hit the wires, that one of I think the number 3 Quds Force commander, his replacement, who's only been on the job for about 3 days, was just killed in a targeted attack as well. So this means the Israelis still have resources on the ground that's enabling them to give precise targeting locations and go after human targets. The goal here, I think, and this has been going on for years, is not to try to invade or to wage war on Iran. I think these are going to be very targeted, focused attacks on the regime and the establishments. And I think the goal here is very clear: is we want to create enough of a gap between the people and the regime to create and bring about regime change internally and organically. This isn't, and I don't think anybody remotely condones putting boots on the ground and putting an occupation force inside Iran. This is about specifically targeting the current regime leadership. It is specifically targeting the current nuclear capabilities for a weaponization program and weakening them to the point where it allows for some sort of regime change to happen. I know we've done a call on this in the past. I'm of the opinion, and have been since I've been working the Iran target my entire life, that there's less than maybe 20% of the populace right now that is in favor of the status quo. That 20%, I think, is equally divided into 2 camps. Half of that, roughly 10%, truly believe in the Islamic ideology that Khomeini brought about. They truly believe in the Islamic Republic's interpretation of Shia Islam, not Shia Islam in general, but their interpretation of it, which I think has to do with the Mahdi sect of Shia that has a much more radical view of what society should look like. The other 10% came from that camp, and a lot of them are current or former clerics, but they are more closely aligned or connected to the dozen or so oligarchs or family throughout Iran that control Iranian society, and they have vast amounts of money and fortune both inside and outside Iran. I think the goal right now is to create that separation between the clerics and everybody else, isolate them completely. I think the 80% does not probably have the resources and isn't organized well enough to cause regime change. But the economic elite, who right now are in danger of losing everything because of these hardliners are the ones that I think have the ability to take action and force some sort of regime change. I've long said that Iran is ripe for regime change when one of two factors happens. One, excuse me, one is the death of Khamenei. He is the supreme leader. He's the leader of the country. Wildly unpopular, very old, very sick. And when he dies, there is going to be a natural turf war for control. Everything from him wanting his son to take over, which nobody wants, to having another cleric or two take over, or a system of clerics, or outright getting rid of the regime. Those are all things that I thought that Iranian society would fight over and would potentially set the conditions for regime change. The other factor that I think would set the conditions for regime change would be some sort of a unilateral attack or strike from the US or Israel or the West that threatened the overall stability of Iran as an economy and as a country and as a going concern. And then this is when the ideologues who aren't necessarily religiously motivated are going to act out of self-preservation and protecting their own bottom line and their own dollars and interests, and having them move against the regime and getting rid of the clerics. The issue right now, and the issue forever, is the regime hardliners, the true believers in the Shia ideology, I think have had a vice grip over Iran going back to the mid-2000s when Ahmadinejad took over. That ideology and within the Mahdi sect truly believes in their version of almost like end times and revelations, when the hidden Imam, the 12th Imam, reappears with Jesus Christ as one of the prophets, and the Shia people have their vengeance and kind of exact their vengeance on the Sunni and establish dominance in the region. The hidden Imam reappears when the world is in absolute chaos and disarray. What better way to do that than going nuclear? These aren't my words. This is something that's very common within Shia ideology. Ahmadinejad, back in 2010, when he was at UNGA in New York, basically said that they felt like they were here to see the coming of the hidden Imam. So that's not who you want in charge of a country. That's not who you want in charge of a country that's going to go nuclear. I don't necessarily want a bunch of corrupt oligarchs in charge of Iran, but a corrupt oligarch is not going to go nuclear. A corrupt oligarch is going to care more about their Bugattis and their vacation homes in Switzerland and Dubai and New York than they are about going nuclear. So this is where I think where we have an opportunity for regime change inside Iran. I actually, as dark as things sound right now, even if we get a hardline light or some pragmatic corrupt oligarchs in charge of Iran, the Middle East, I think, then is poised to explode in a very positive way. I think the Gulf, the Arabs, the Israelis understand that there's a very bright future for them, as well as the Iranian people. The key impediment there is the regime. So the next couple of weeks, the next couple of days are going to be interesting. I think, as you guys have saw in the news, Trump canceled his trip to the G7. He's back in DC meeting with his National Security Council. The U.S. is deploying some significant resources in the Middle East in way of aircraft and in way of refueling tankers. So all indications right now is we're flexing pretty heavily to try to force some sort of negotiation or some sort of an agreement with Iran. If that doesn't work, then I think you're going to see a continuation of carrot and stick diplomacy. What escalation would look like then would be the direct targeting of Fodor, which is the mountain fortress that Iran has built over the decades, where a bulk of their uranium processing capabilities and centrifuges are. So I could take it 1,000 different ways, but I'm sure there's plenty of questions, so I'll pause there.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think it'd be good to have some questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Adam, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Hamlet, great presentation. Thank you. When you talk about the vacuum of power, the vacuum of leadership, it's a very young population, the Iranians. And if I understood you correctly, you're suggesting that power of leadership may be filled by the economic class, the elite. Aren't they really a big part of the IRGC? Or they come from the IRGC? Because they own the economy, really.
100%. You're 100% correct. The IRGC has been working steadily to take over control of the Iranian military, industrial, and nuclear, and even clerical industrial complex for a better part of 20 years. So a massive amount of wealth is concentrated around the IRGC, and some of the leaders and some of the families that are influential there. But the issue here is, don't look at the IRGC as this monolithic group of goblins and bad guys. They are. But a lot of those guys began as hardcore clerics, but they are about as corrupt and deviant as anything. They drink, they womanize, drugs. I mean, all that stuff. They're there.
But they're not nuclear.
They're just part of the 5 families that control the country, and it just so happens part of the wing is very religious and cultish and believes in the ideology. The other half doesn't. They just want to stay in power because they don't want to lose power because they have absolute wealth right now.
And they're not nuclear.
No, because if you're worth billions of dollars and you got all sorts of toys and prizes and houses all over the world, if you go nuclear, you lose all that. So this is where the greed component can kick in and cause them to turn on the other 10%. That's where we're faced with right now. I hate to say it, the other 80%, as much as I would love for the Iranian people to be 100% free, I just don't see how we can get there. Unless that 80% coalesces around a key figurehead, and whether that's the Crown Prince Pahlavi, and that leads to some sort of a sea change within Iran. That is a possibility. There's a lot of rather conservative, libertarian folks or Iranians in the West that believe that a technocratically run Iran could be a massive boom, and Iran could turn into a massive innovation and human capital hub in the Middle East, because, to your point, Adam, the demographics set up that way. I just don't think that 80% is properly well organized to take advantage of that. The first step of it is getting rid of the clerics, because they are the death wish cult that is about to get their fingers on a nuclear device. That can't happen. I'll take a bunch of corrupt energy pragmatics first.
And we got several other questions.
Sure.
Tim?
Hi,
Thank you,
Hamlet.
Hamlet.
This isn't so much a question as maybe more of a prompt. I was under the impression that, and I could be wrong, that Russia and Iran are somewhat aligned. But I guess I'm thinking, and I can hear your thoughts, that Iran kind of being busy with Ukraine, they're probably keeping somewhat of a lower profile on this one than they might otherwise. But do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, Iran and Russia are very much involved. I think they just scrambled to sign some sort of a joint agreement like this week. Iran has been one of the chief suppliers of Shahed drones and armaments in the Ukraine war. They've been backing Putin from the jump. What's ironic there is, throughout the history of Iran, Persians, Iranians generally disdain and don't like Russians. So the fact that you have these bedfellows is pretty ironic. And this is also why I think if we can get regime change in Iran, we dramatically change the balance of power in geopolitics in multiple ways. We cut off one of Putin's chief provider of arms. Obviously, Hezbollah and Hamas go dry, but the CCP now loses one of their chief allies and sources of fuel as well.
Michael Hammer?
Thank you, Hamlet. 2 questions. You haven't mentioned the Houthis in your discussion.
Mhm.
So how do they play into things? And then the other question is, what is the risk of Iran using dirty weapons? Even though they don't have nuclear weapons, they can certainly build dirty warheads.
Yeah, look, that's a real risk. If you have enough enriched uranium at 60, 70%, is there a risk you can create a dirty bomb? Probable. Again, I don't know where to factor that use case. On the Houthi front, the Houthis have been obviously significantly marginalized for a better part of a year. The Iranians have been using the Houthis to launch drones and attacks against global shipping in the Red Sea. In return, the U.S. and Israel has, I think, done a pretty thorough job of pounding them pretty regularly since then. Could they become active in a certain way? Possibly, even if the U.S. does get involved in a kinetic conflict with Ukraine. I'm sorry, with with Iran, could you start seeing the Houthis kind of re-engage and begin to attack global shipping possibly? But I mean, they're the least of my worries right now in that part of the world. I'm more worried about what Hezbollah does if they feel absolutely cornered, and do they have proxies and people in the West? And if they do, what kind of actions will they take? That concerns me a lot more than the Houthis.
Speaking of Hamlet of Hezbollah, what are the dynamics in Syria, in your view today?
Look, I mean, Syria is a mess. Iran obviously lost its biggest proxy in the region. It owned the turf with Jolani in power now. Obviously, a staunch Sunni, anti-Iran in many ways. So Hezbollah, I think, is severely, I think, damaged and hampered in Syria. But don't discount what happened with Operation Grim Beeper. This was the pager attack that the Israelis launched in September of this past year. I mean, it completely neutralized the senior ranks within Hezbollah. And as Israel marched into southern Lebanon, it forced all of these cockroaches to scramble around southern Lebanon. And Israel was very efficient in targeting and killing senior leaderships within Hezbollah, to include Nasrallah in the senior ranks. So Hezbollah is definitely still a concern. They're not dead. They're not gone. Or I think hopefully in the near term, significantly eroded. But there's still a movement. They're still the largest armed military, nor coordinated military in Lebanon, more powerful than Lebanese army. So they're not gone. And their proxies are still out there abroad.
We'll keep it going. I was about to ask what the risk of these sleeper cells all around the world with drones and otherwise, what that means for the U.S. But I'll pause on that. We got 5 other questions. What's
Sure.
There are big minorities in Iran. I'm talking about Kurds, 10 million Kurds, Azerbaijanis, Turkish. How these people gonna behave, and what's their attitude toward changes, and what is the potential outcome for those minorities?
Yeah, no, great question. 50% of the Iranian populace is Persian. The other 25% is ethnic Azeris. Most of those guys are in the northwest, up by Tabriz and Urumia and Rezaiya, that area. The entire west part of Iran is a mix of Kurds and Arabs, and the southeast you have ethnic Baluch, who are Sunni as well. So if I mean the worst case scenario for Iran as a country is if it does begin to bifurcate and you have a complete void in leadership, you could have the potential for significant uprisings across ethnic lines. I think Persian pride or Iranian pride is still pretty strong, regardless of ethnic minorities. But if you look at what happened in the protests in 22 and 23, they began in the heavily Kurdish regions of the West, and they began in the very Baluch centric parts of the East, and they spread inwards inside the country. So longer term, if there is an uprising within Iran or a push for reform and change, I think the ethnic minorities are going to play a part in it. But I don't think it's going to push Iran down the path of any kind of like a bifurcation or a civil war. I think the cultural fabric of Iran, regardless of ethnic and religious minorities, is still pretty strong.
So just Anthony, if you don't mind, the Gator and Ben, just since they haven't asked a question in this chat. Gator?
Yeah. You had mentioned the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. What do you think the odds are of either him or any of the other expat political exiles being able to strike some sort of deal with the more oligarchic rather than fanatical parts of the IRGC, to broker an end to the Islamic Republic?
Look, in the ideal scenario, I hope that happens. I hope the monarchists can strike a deal with the pragmatists, who can strike a deal with kind of the oligarchs. But the only people that tend to shoot themselves in the foot more often than the Kurds are the Iranians. But there could be a scenario where you can see this happening. What's ironic is in 1979, when the Shah fell, a lot of the country wanted their version of hope and change. They didn't want a Shah in power anymore. But a small minority represented the theocracy and kind of the Marxist roots of what the MEK was all about, probably less than about 20%. They were organized enough to take power and take control. And then Khomeini became kind of the de facto face of this change movement and got into power, consolidated power, and off to the races. So to me, it'd be kind of ironic if the Shah's son ends up being the figurehead that everyone rallies around. And he's made it very clear he's got no desire to run the country. He wants the country run by a technocratic, open, free, Western-style society that has Islamic roots, just like Western society in the U.S. Our foundation is Judeo-Christian, but we have a separation of church and state, and we're supposed to be run by a bunch of technocrats.
Right.
He sees that same vision for Iran, where the monarchy would be reestablished purely for cultural and pageantry than power and authority. So I think there's a chance that does happen. I hope it does, because I think there's a massive amount of positive potential for Iran, for the region, if that does happen.
Ben, you're new to
Thanks, Sam.
Ben, you're new to the community. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So Ben Zaror, background in finance, startups, and venture capital. I'm currently building my third startup, an AI operating system for the enterprise. I'm actually from the Middle East region originally. Lived there till I was 10 and moved here to the States, and have lived in the States ever since. One question, as I sort of think about what you're speaking of, Hamlet, we as investors, we're sort of taught to take example from history and sort of reassess through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
You speak of having even a corrupt government in power that may be better than the current Iranian government. Are you not afraid of a repetition of what happened in Iraq with Saddam, right? And not only did we lose millions of lives that were Iraqis there, we lost thousands of American lives as well, right? Are you not afraid of what's happening in Egypt or Lebanon? I mean, a big driver of Hezbollah support is the corruption in government, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about those things?
All of those suck, but they're better than the alternative, which is to have a clerical, theocratical establishment inside Iran that's nuclear. As far as exposure to American and Western lives, there isn't a credible analyst out there that I've seen that recommends putting boots on the ground and repeating Iraq and Afghanistan. That's absolutely not what is in the best interest for the Iranian people. The regime change and change must come from inside and must be owned by the Iranian people. The likelihood of us getting something worse than we currently have is pretty low. The likelihood of us getting everything we want in an open, free, Western liberal society is achievable, but yeah, there's a lot of bad in between there. If we get any of that, I think it's an improvement of where we are right now. If we get rid of the clerical regime and we get rid of Iran as a nuclear threat, then you open up Iran. Then you release sanctions. Then you start bringing them into the Western, kind of the Western order of a rules-based society. So I think anything's gonna be better than what we have right now. Can an absolute oligopoly take over and be just as ruthless, but not down an ideological bent? Yeah, it's entirely possible. But a bunch of greedy oligarchs in charge of a country aren't going to go nuclear. So for me, it's addressing that first existential threat, which is a nation state that is nuclear and is not worried or concerned about using it, and almost feels like entitled they should. That is the first threat you need to get rid of. Once you get rid of that, then you can start working on what is probably a more ideal society for us to have inside Iran.
So Bruce, like 30 minutes ago, you yielded your time so that Hamlet could start. Now we're back to you.
Was that only 30 minutes ago? I felt like I got a history lesson for the last couple of
I
seconds.
know.
That was brilliant, Hamlet. I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad to hear we're finally not talking about trying to take out the nuclear program, but take out the leadership and go for regime change. As soon as we start saying that and acting that way, it can be different. I think when we saw the Israelis take out the air defense systems the last go around, we knew this was coming.
Yep.
My concern now is that the Israelis don't have a good history of winning the popular, because they've taken out, because they can do what they want. I'm afraid they're going to go in now and start raging destruction on a people that they want to win over, and creating actually enemies of people that could become allies for the West. So that's a concern. Maybe you can discuss. But from a warfighting capability, one of the things that really scares me is the way we're treating assassinations so frivolously. It used to be a big deal if you're going to go in and target somebody in their home by taking out the floor that they're living on and the 2 floors above below. Now we're doing that with impunity. And remember that we all live in places where people can find us too.
Oh,
And
totally.
those drones are getting a whole lot less expensive. So all of a sudden, we think that there's a US senator who said something outrageous and somebody puts a drone in his backyard. So I'm really concerned that this is just becoming too common and too easy for us to just normalize.
Yeah. Well, couldn't agree with you more on that one. As far as I mean, let's begin the first part. What's this operation called that Israel has launched? Operation Rising Lion. Do you guys understand the significance there? So prior to the fall of the Shah, the Iranian flag. So the Iranian flag currently has the word Iran in Islamic script, or Allah or something. But that's emblazoned on the front of the Iranian flag right now. Prior to 1979, the Iranian symbol was a lion holding a sword. So Persian pride has always been linked around the lion. When Khomeini took over, he wanted to get rid of all sense of nationalism and make everything about the Quran himself and the religion. So the whole concept of rising lion, to me, I think is absolutely brilliant cognitive warfare and messaging from the Israelis saying, "Hey, man, we're with you." There's been countless demonstrations by the Iranian diaspora throughout the West in the last 2 years supportive of Israel. And I think Israel is being very, very thoughtful in terms of what they attack to only hit initially the strategic targets and individuals. I think the reason why you saw Trump's comments, this is my personal opinion, for Iranians to evacuate Tehran, is if there is going to be escalation, and carrot and stick diplomacy requires more stick and less carrot because the Iranians being obstinate, then there may be more attacks inside Tehran. Who do you think taught Hamas and Hezbollah how to build complex infrastructure below civilian targets to protect military asset? It was the IRGC, it was the regime. So unfortunately, that is a direction we could go. And I think Israel is being as cautious as they can in terms of who and what they target. On the front of assassinations, the one good thing that Biden did in his 4 years is, although they got very close to giving Iran a nuclear deal, they did not budge in taking the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, off of the foreign terrorism list for the State Department, which means these are non-state actors. These are leaders of a terrorist organization. So if an IRGC Quds Force commander, he can call himself a commander all he wants, but he's still now on paper the head of an international terrorist organization. That makes him fair play for forehead on a warhead, or a warhead on a forehead. So that gives them the bit of kind of, I guess, clarity or the tacit approval to do that. It is a dangerous game. To your point, we don't want to see his heads of state being attacked. It's probably why Israel thought about taking out Khamenei, and according to the reporting, the Trump administration said absolutely no, because we don't do that. The issue you touched on in terms of drone warfare, I mean, that's a separate 2-hour call on how autonomous technologies in drones and warfare is being completely disrupted by drones and autonomous systems. I mean, you have the Houthis destroying global shipping for a couple $100,000. You have the Ukrainians for a couple $1 million destroying billions of dollars of Russian hardware. So the evolution of warfare and drones is real. In this case, like I said, the Iranians got hit pretty hard because the Israelis were able to smuggle components into Iran. In some cases, I've seen reporting that they claim that they were 3D printing components in the field in Iran, and then launching small-scale drones against very precise targets. So It's a changing battlefield for sure, but the assassination piece, I hope that obviously does not reach the nation state level. But in terms of what you see in Israel, I'm thinking, and I hope the focus will be on civilian or on non-civilian targets.
So Bill Dykel, you have a question?
Yeah, quick one. Yusuf, great stuff as always. So as I understand, the Natanz facility has pretty much been neutralized. It seems as though that Fedor is the last one, just because of the configuration of that. But if, should the US decide to go ahead and send in, one sortie with a B-2, that would probably be taken care of, or sequential runs by Israel on that one. And then I also understand that about a third of the ballistic missile launchers have been taken out, as well. So Iran is almost been neutralized. What else do you think needs to happen before the circumstances are such that we could see some uprising and some
Yeah.
or potential negotiation on a new government?
I hope we're there, or I hope we're almost there. My issue and concern, and again, not to make this about, it's not about religion either. It's about a very specific sect within Shia Islam, that this idea of pain and suffering and martyrdom, it's almost like a rite of passage. It's one thing when an individual feels that way. It's another when you have people who run a government or run a country believe that way. Do they have a quit button? Do they throw in the towel and come to the table? Or is this a case where either through direct kinetic attacks or through some sort of a homegrown internal purging, they're not going to give up until they're dead? Fordo is a challenge because it's buried inside of a mountain. So it would require some significant deployment of resources, air resources, to neutralize it and destroy it. Some speculation is if there is ever a reason to put boots on the ground, that could be it, to get in there and neutralize it. But that's not going to be an easy solution. I hope that calmer heads, or in this case, maybe greedy heads in Iran, persevere, and you have people turning on each other, and kind of gutting the government from the inside out. I still think that's a real possibility. But they're right now, their ability to directly wage war, I think is by hour, I think is being degraded. And yeah, I think estimates where they had anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 ballistic missiles. They've fired at least 20-30% of them in the last 4 or 5 days. And yeah, those launches are being regularly targeted. And that's the benefit of the Israelis right now. They own the air. So as soon as it goes off, they can attack it.
What does that mean for Russia's supply from Iran of armaments?
They're screwed. They're totally screwed. Which is I love. And like I said, fixing Iran damages our adversaries in so many ways. Now the Iranians have helped the Russians build Shahed manufacturing facilities inside Russia. So it's not like it's if Iran falls tomorrow, it's their only source, but it definitely does hurt them.
So maybe Adam, if it's okay, let Charles ask the question since he's new. Charles?
Yeah, hey, good morning, guys. How are you? Or good afternoon. Yeah, so I think the question I'd like to know is, I mean, look, we had an opportunity in 1979 to put a bullet into Khomeini's head, right? You know, and when he was chilling in Paris. So I'm trying to figure out what's different now. I mean, apart from where we were back in, back then. I mean, I think the question is, do they really have I mean, realistically, right? I mean, US Intel and Israeli Intel are differing on this. Do they really have the capability to do a nuclear weapon, or is it just, speculative that they could go in this direction?
Look, all intel pointed to them getting closer and closer to a weaponized program. The IAEA came out in April And their assessment, this is an independent body, their assessment was Iran was enriching uranium to the 60% plus level. There is zero need to invest in time and resources to do that if you're not building towards a nuclear weapons program. So I think it got to the point where the Israelis and probably the Americans realized that, okay, there is no negotiating with these people at this point. We've tried carrot diplomacy for years. We've threatened the stick and haven't really followed through. And I think the Israelis got to the point where they thought it was time to act. And I'm not 100% accurate on this one, but I believe at some point, 60 plus days ago, in one of Trump's many tweets, I think he said the Iranians had about 60 days to act. I saw a couple social media posts that Thursday was day 61 or 62. So if you're going to have carrot and stick diplomacy, it doesn't mean shit if you're not enforcing the carrot. If you're going to draw
I
a
mean, couldn't
line,
Pakistan
it
move
doesn't
into
mean
this?
anything. What's that?
I'm saying, couldn't Pakistan move into this? I mean, Pakistan has already said they're ready to. I mean, they've got it already, right? I mean, the issue is whether Iranians get it by themselves or Pakistan even possibly.
I don't see a scenario where a Sunni country would provide nuclear to this particular Shia sect. Not to mention that Iran and Pakistan have already traded blows in the last year over fighting around the Baluchistan border. And the Baluchistan is an ethnic region that spans both countries. So those two countries already don't like each other. I don't see a scenario where Pakistan freely lends a nuclear weapon to Iran. If anything, it's the other way around. If Iran goes nuclear tomorrow, I could see Pakistan lending that technology to the kingdom and to the other Arabs in the region.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't see it going the other way.
Okay, so Adam and then
Yeah, Hamlet, fantastic summary here. My question to you is, I see a lot of similarities in the template, how these operations have been executed by the Ukrainians as well as the Iranians, the marriage between human intel on the ground and technology with the drones. Now, my question to you is, the Israelis have been very good in penetrating the Iranian intelligence. And what drives that? How are they able to do that? Is that discontent within society? Is it discontent within the military? How is that being driven? The Ukrainian side, I understand. The Iranian side, I don't.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of all three. If you're a pious Shia, maybe they're pointing out to all the corruption within the clerical and oligarchical establishment. This is who you want to support. That's a way that they're winning over supporters and collaborators. In many cases, it comes down to the simple piece of greed and finances. They're being bought because they believe that they have a brighter future in being on the payroll of the Israelis and helping bring about regime change. So there's a whole host of factors that play into it. It's the disenfranchisement of the ideology. The clerics say that they're pious and clean, but here they are running brothels to support their vile habits. There's a lot of things that I think the Israelis have and probably use to convert these people in country, but it's usually a mix of ideological opposition and financial motivation and self-preservation.
Ben?
Thank you, Hamlet.
Hamlet, thanks. Yep. Thanks again for sharing your opinion. It's truly valuable. One more question from my end. Just in terms of how this all ties back to Russia and China, and I really think the Middle East is just a giant proxy war for these larger powers. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, this is why I opened this call the way I did. I don't think things are happening in a vacuum. I think Xi and Putin got together in the Beijing Olympics, and this plan was discussed a long time ago. I think Xi wanted Vlad to go first and try to take over a nation state and see how he does, because he had his own thoughts and visions of what he'd want to eventually do in the South China Sea. I think he wanted to use a provocation by Putin in Ukraine and a provocation of Iran in the region to start weakening the balance of power in the West, because I think Xi sees a future where there is no Western influence, where the only influence is the Beijing model, which is a strong command of the masses by the few, and it's the shots are being called out of Beijing. So this is what he envisioned. I would like to knock on wood and say this is all starting to miraculously fall apart under his very feet. I think there's a lot of similarities between Putin, Xi, and the Iranian regime. I think all three are incredibly weak, totalitarian misfits that don't represent the populace. I think all three, with the right pressures and influence and dynamics, are right to fall. My concern is with all three is what do they do when they're being shoved or kicked off the geopolitical stage, and how violent and how destructive they become. I'm least concerned about Xi and Putin in terms of end times, because again, both of those guys want to be known as the people that gave rebirth to the Russian Empire or the Middle Kingdom. They don't want history to judge them as the totalitarian misfit that began a nuclear war. So I don't think they're going to go nuclear. I think they'll threaten it. My concern with Iran is again, it's the Shia sect, the Mahdi sect within Islam, that is in charge of the nuclear program and is in charge inside Iran. I'm not confident when pushed back against the wall, they wouldn't go nuclear. But more concerning, they would see that as a bringing about of their version of end times and revelations. That's the scary component for me.
As a quick follow-up question to that, where do we sit on our confidence here in the States of, push comes to shove, Israel doesn't use their nuclear?
I don't think there's any scenario where Israel would use nuclear, because then they lose the high ground, they lose the moral authority, they lose the Iranian people. I think the only way, I hope and I would think that Israel would ever go nuclear is if it's a reaction to a direct nuclear strike from Iran, which I'm hoping is a very, very, very low probability.
Would a dirty weapon trigger
A dirty
that?
weapon
Hamlet?
inside Iran, I don't think Israel would do anything. A dirty
No,
weapon
I'm talking about
inside,
dirty
yeah,
weapon inside Israel.
dirty
Yeah.
weapon inside Israel, or a dirty weapon where the U.S. forces are in Bahrain, a dirty weapon at a U.S. base in the region, that would, I think, change the dynamics somewhat. But again, I don't think it would justify a nuclear response. Nope, can't hear you, Mark.
Does this change the calculus for China at all in terms of their going after Taiwan, seeing the challenges Russia has had and now what's going on with Iran?
It absolutely does. This is why I think this does not bode well for China. You could see a summer where China loses two of its proxies. If Trump strikes some sort of an interim deal with Putin, that isn't good for anybody, but it actually gets Putin to sit on the sidelines, that weakens China. If Iran falls and becomes a Western leading state, that's bad for China. So China's got some issues. It's arguably why China would want to then look at going after and establishing a deeper bond with a country like Pakistan, that's nuclear and has their own little desires within the region. Could China then potentially pivot north and go after parts of outer Manchuria if Russia kind of sits on the sideline or doesn't support China? There's all sorts of factors that break there, but China by far is, I think, the biggest existential threat. Not China. The Chinese Communist Party is the biggest existential threat to the West. But they also are not this 20 feet tall giant and bulletproof power that we seem to think they are. They have all sorts of issues internally.
Hamlet, to that point, what do you think of the rumors regarding regime change with Xi?
I don't think you'll see a regime change with Xi. I think if Xi falls, I don't want to say China falls into a civil war, but I think China fractures to a certain extent and goes back to what it's been like for a good chunk of its of its existence, which are these independent federalistic states that have a somewhat common culture and language, but are much more of a decentralized power. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think if you look at Chinese history, it's gone through these pendulum swings where it's gone from authoritarian centralized command to more of a decentralized model. And could we see that happen? Possibly. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that there is no such thing as a communist party in China anymore. Xi has basically eradicated everyone around him that's competent and could take power, which means now you have a party of one.
Andrew Voss?
Thanks, Youssef. As outside of those obvious players, are there any smaller countries that give you concern in terms of alignment with the current ideology of the country? Any outliers?
Yeah, it'll be controversial. The biggest outlier is, I think Mexico is at a key inflection point. You have a large chunk of their natural resources are concentrated in the north. By many speculations, parts of the north are becoming an ungovernable narco state. You have a government that is teetering closer and closer, going left, and partnering and being okay with being basically not a proxy, but a close ally of China, particularly the Communist Party. So that to me is of concern. The number I've heard kicked around is upwards of 15 to 20% of the Mexican economy has some ties directly to cartels. That's concerning. But this also goes back into one of the things that President Trump did shortly after taking power, is he designated the cartels as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. Everyone speculated, well, this means now the U.S. military is going to start doing unilateral operations into Mexico and starting bombing cartels and whatever. That's not the only thing being on the FTO list allows. When an entity is on the FTO list and has ties to an adversarial country like China, it opens up the whole gamut of what we can do against those individuals and those entities in terms of lawfare, finance, and kind of the powers of the bureaucratic state. So, but Mexico, I think, concerns me because if we can get Mexico right, which I think we can, is you have the formation of a significant superpower or superbloc in North America. Some of us call it Fortress North America. An independent, not 51st state Canada, and an independent Mexico working in unison with America. We have all the natural resources, all the human capital, all the financial capital we have and need here in the Americas. And from there, I think you see a steady push through Mexico into Central and South America to form a unified bloc. Because if you look at the cultural roots of the Americas, we all came from the same place, Western Europe. So culturally very similar, obviously some nuances in language, religiously very similar, but there's a bright future there for the Americas. But if I'm thinking of what a black swan looks like in a state that no one's talking about, for me, I think it would be Mexico.
Hamlet, have you heard a rumor? I got a research company reached out that I respect, reached out and said that there's a secret deal potentially between President Trump and Putin to trade basically Ukraine for Iran, and that Russia would get what they want and we'd get the Middle East calmed down. Have you heard anything around that, or is what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's kind of what's playing out right now. Again, this is pure speculation. I have zero insights to this, but I mean, there's speculation that Putin is going to get to keep some parts of what he's taken. The West is going to get mining rights in eastern Ukraine. Crimea might get recognized as a Soviet territory, excuse me, Russian territory. Freudian slip there. And in return, the U.S. potentially would get some sort of a base or some sort of permanent operations inside Ukraine to protect our mineral rights to the east. And the trade to Putin would be, hey, you're going to get all this. We need you to cut ties with Iran. Iran is now no longer going to be a proxy or a partner of Russia. Because if you look at it, this Cold War that we're in right now has three very bad actors that are very aligned at the hip. Xi, the Islamic regime, and Putin. If Trump creates two significant fissure points between Russia and Iran, that isolates China. That to me is a good thing. And I'm not surprised if that happens. Everyone's worried about, oh, the rise of BRICS. Well, if you look at BRICS, three of the acronyms hate each other. Take Brazil out of that. Russia and China hate each other. Russia took Outer Manchuria, which is now Siberia. I think China has a long-term score they want to settle there. India and China are not friends. There is no future where China becomes the global superpower and doesn't come at the detriment of India. So that whole block, I think, is ripe for ruin.
Thank you.
Anthony, Adam?
Would you speak a little bit about any changes that are on any level with the US administration or globally as it relates to space, and on any level, whether it's energy, defense, rare metals, leisure, whatever it may be, and how this ties or not into anything that you've discussed? And I'm asking, given your day job with the defense VC.
Yeah, no, that's a separate 4-hour conversation. I'll keep it very short on space. Space to me is the next frontier. It's pivotal for us to own the high ground. I think NASA and the U.S. government has basically said we'll take care of deep space exploration. LEO, GEO, and lunar is now going to be run by the private sector. So innovation coming primarily from the startup community is playing a big part in that arena. The importance of space to me is analogous to the importance of the high seas at the dawn of the industrial age. The nation states that were able to command control of the high seas at the 1700s, 1800s were able to dictate geopolitics and governance for centuries to come. Space is going to become that same paradigm. So much of what we do now is moving up there. Communications, guidance, data storage. You have companies that are actually building or looking to build facilities to manufacture and do testing in space. And then obviously you have the lunar economy, which is something that we're all racing towards. Everything from mining to exploration to a launching site for deeper space. All that is being driven by the private sector, which raises the importance of this collaboration between private innovation, private capital, private sector, and government. And not to talk our book, because we are a VC fund that invests exactly in this space. There's never been an opportunity where I think it's so ripe for some significant wealth creation to happen. And I'll kind of close on this. It ties back into the Iran piece as well. I think the world right now is going through some tectonic shifts geopolitically. Between the 1890s and kind of the 1950s, 1960s, in that generation, we went from the horse and buggy and oil power lamp to the flying vehicle, to rocketry, to computers, to the nuclear age, 2 world wars, an economic collapse in the Great Depression, a pandemic. And in that process, you saw a complete collapse of geopolitical norms. You had the balkanization of Europe and the Middle East. You had the rise of America as a superpower. You had fall of the British Empire, where they didn't have absolute control across every time zone. And all that was driven by innovations in technology. That was a 60-year disruption. We're about to go through that in about a 5 or 10-year period. So I think everything we understand in terms of geopolitical norms and how we govern, how we fight, how we educate, how we entertain is going to change at a demonstrable pace. And if you're an allocator and you're going to stick your head in the ground and buy gold and go long, you're going to lose.
And Hamlet, to that point, since we're in Silicon Valley, we haven't really talked about AI in this discussion.
Yeah. So this goes back to, as I was listening to the first part of when you guys were talking about AI. I mean, there's, pop quiz.
Can I just dive in? One quick question on what you said. Grateful and thank you. How much of what you said is shared by your peers in a similar vein, and or the administration, or is that your your firm view? In other words, how to what degree is that common knowledge, what you said, or is it more like very elite select that might have that sentiment? And,
our
how is
view
that manifesting?
It's a great question. Our view
what
was
part of that manifestation are we in? Is it like less than zero? Is it just getting started? Or is it well on the way to what you described? Thank you.
Our view and our kind of worldview and everything I shared was a significant outlier in 2018 when we first started. But between Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2, you're seeing a significant movement in this direction where not only is government beginning to embrace this, I think you're starting to see institutional finance funds, institutional investors all begin to realize and grasp this area. To be able to navigate the geopolitical disruption that's ahead and the technological disruption that's ahead, you cannot be a passive investor. You can't be a tourist investor and just kind of come through and pick deals and throw money at it. You have to make sure you're investing in and with managers who have deep insight and expertise. You have to make sure you have a really good pulse in terms of geopolitics and working with the proper business intelligence outfits that have a good ability to see around the curve. And if you do, then I think you're in really good shape. On the AI front, kind of the underscore the importance of that. Whoever controls disruptive technologies like AI, space, and quantum is going to dictate geopolitics in the 21st century. Those are not my words. Those are paraphrased words of Xi and Putin. This is something they believed for a while right now. And I think we're starting to wake up and realize that this is a technology-driven arms race that we need to win.
I raised it just because you said 60 years, 5-6 years. I think this is even shorter, potentially, coming out of what we discussed yesterday. Adam?
Yeah, quick comment. Stephen, you had asked about that grand bargain between Xi and Putin. Part of that bargain is
between Trump and Putin.
Right, Trump and Putin. But there's also discussions of Cuba and Venezuela being part of that deal with Trump and Putin. So I'll leave it at that. I have to jump. Thank you, gentlemen, for such a great presentation. Hamlet, fantastic. Loved it. Very informative.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hey,
Adam.
Take care.
Charles?
Thank you.
Charles?
Yeah, just one question to Hamlin. By the way, thanks. This is really interesting. Question on you said quantum. Where was your thinking in terms of the real application that these guys are really concerned about?
I mean, for quantum, it comes down to being able to process massive amounts of data. The application there, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but
Yeah.
from a security standpoint, quantum allows you to hack and break everything. In terms of data analytics, it allows you to be able to process, manage, and make decisions off of vast amounts of data. And if you think the future of warfare isn't going to be a bunch of 20-year-old kids flying or shooting against each other, and it's going to be a network of autonomous systems, drones, robots, or whatever, getting breakthrough in terms of quantum entanglement, quantum encryption, and quantum computing to be able to process massive amounts of data with an AI overlay and apply it on a battlefield, it's going to be absolutely critical, and then be able to secure it from a cybersecurity standpoint. So that doctrine is still being written. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of what that world's going to look like. But when I say that everything we know and understand in terms of how we govern, fight, communicate, and do commerce, all that is changing. And big data analytics is a big part of it. The breakthrough in quantum, I think, exponentially improves our ability to process, store, and secure data and use it.
Yeah, RSA 256 still needs to be cracked.
Yeah, well, post-quantum.
With high fidelity.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, appreciate it.
Ben is back.
Once again. I'm curious, as somebody building an AI myself, I see two types of AI systems being built. One that is sort of black box, AI is smarter than humans. Let's train it and let it take over from where humans leave off. And the other thesis is human-centric AI, where you're sort of combining AI agility and speed with human strategy and ingenuity.
Right.
I'm curious about your perspective there, how, one, that applies to government and how government is using AI, but also, two, which thesis you see winning moving forward, and especially when it comes to the difference in how perspective makes a significant change in results, right? For example, as an investor, you have you and I may have a different perspective on a specific topic. As you said right now, a moment ago, and investors need to make long-term bets, right? They need to have a thesis. So how do you see the various theses of the world playing out in combination with the sort of speed and agility of AI?
Look, I still think it's a jump ball. And if I understand the question, do you think where is the disruption going to come from? Is it going to be closed or open models? Is that
not necessarily closed or open models, right? Like today, and you saw this with the recent release of Apple's research about fake reasoning, right? And for the folks that didn't get a chance to read that, it came out I think last week or the week prior, where Apple basically took many of these like large models, these mainstream large models from an OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever, pick them out of their sandbox where they're trained on specific puzzles that they've seen 70,000 times, and they can recognize those patterns, very, very seamlessly, and put them in a new sandbox with brand new puzzles, and they completely broke, right? Which is a clear sign that reasoning is not happening. It's just pattern recognition. And if you compare that to the human mind, just as a sort of side-by-side comparison, a real reasoning mind can find similarities. So let's say you're doing two puzzles, one that you know at 100% rate, another that you know at a 20% rate. The human mind will take that 20% similarity and start building assumptions off that 20%. And AI can't do that. So reasoning is not there. In my thesis on building AI is we actually still need a human strategy and ingenuity and creativity to be embedded in the workflows that AI is building for us. But you see an OpenAI or a Grok or an Anthropic building models where you just prompt an AI and you get a result. You don't necessarily get to see what happens in the middle. You don't get to influence what happens in the middle with that human ingenuity. And I'm curious, from your world and where you're sitting, which side do you see winning, or being more successful with users moving forward?
Yeah, I think the jury's out on that one. I mean, I think the default is the more access you have to more data, the better you can train your AI. But garbage in, garbage out. If you pollute that solution set, if adversarial AI is allowed to pollute that data set, then what you get out of it is probably going to be insufficient. So it makes the case for a closed network. But if you have a closed network, then you're limited with what you can put into it for it to learn. So I think you're going to see a hybrid of both at some point. I just don't know what that's going to look like.
Hamlet, this is awesome. Thanks for reaching out yesterday. Very timely and gave a lot of great insights for the group.
Yeah,
much appreciated. And not pitching, but Hamlet does have a fund that we're going to raise on, correct?
Yep.
And
yeah,
at
we're
the end of the year.
So we're right smack dab in the middle of the space. A lot of our platforms are very active in theater. So it's a unique world we're living in. Making ourselves as one of the thought leaders in the space.
And as Bill Deukler put in the notes, if you're not doing the research that Hamlet and his team are doing, you're probably end up on the wrong side.
Every year.
Totally.
So, thanks, Hamlet.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. I'll put my contact information obviously in the chat, so more than happy to continue to follow up here. It's been a busy day here, but appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Hamlet. Thank you, Ben, new to the community. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Bill, as always. Thank you, everyone. So we're off to Seattle. We'll be in Bellevue for tonight, and if you're in town, we'll learn about the future of gaming, the angel investor scene there, and then we're off to Seattle to talk about Northwest U.S. zeitgeist, still reflecting on what we just learned in Silicon Valley, and particularly in Berkeley. I'm still puzzled why Berkeley doesn't get its due vis-a-vis Stanford.
Yeah.
But innovation is really human-centric innovation is really key. So it's been interesting to be in these meccas. Thank you again, Hamlet. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you soon.
All right, we'll see y'all.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.